Everyone said the twins would break anyone who tried, but no one expected the moment they would finally stop. The music was still playing when the first glass hit the marble floor, not shattered in anger but dropped in defiance. The sharp sound echoing across the grand ballroom as conversations died mid-sentence and heads turned in unison toward the center of the room where Lucas Carter stood, chest rising and falling too fast for a boy his age, his small hands clenched at his sides while beside him. Lily Carter pressed her back against a white-clothed table, eyes wide, scanning for an escape that didn't exist, the golden lights above them flickering softly against polished chandeliers as if nothing was wrong. As if this wasn't the third public scene in 2 months involving the children of one of the most powerful men in the city, Ethan Carter stood just a few feet away, frozen not because he didn't know what to do, but because nothing he had ever done had worked, not the specialists, not the therapists, not the endless line of nannies who lasted days, sometimes hours, before walking out of his home with tight smiles and polite excuses. The whispers had already started again, low and sharp like needles behind silk gloves. That's them. The Carter twins. Poor kids, someone murmured while another voice followed, quieter but heavier. Or poor staff, a faint laugh trailing behind it. Ethan heard it all, every word landing harder than the last. But he didn't move, because moving meant failing again, and he was tired of failing where it mattered most. Lucas took a step back, bumping into a chair that scraped loudly across the floor, drawing more attention, more eyes, more judgment, and Lily's fingers curled into the edge of the tablecloth, her breathing shallow, as if she were bracing for something no one else could see. The event had been meant to repair his image. A charity gala streamed live across multiple platforms. Donors, partners, press, all gathered under one roof to watch the man who built a billion-dollar empire speak about leadership and responsibility. But none of that mattered now. Not when his own children looked like strangers standing in the center of a room that felt too big, too loud, too unforgiving, and then, through the tension thick enough to taste, a voice cut through, not loud, not commanding, but steady in a way that made people pause without understanding why. Give them space, the woman said, and it wasn't an order. It was something else, something calmer, something that didn't challenge the chaos but refused to be swallowed by it. A few guests instinctively stepped back, not because they had to but because the tone made it feel like the right thing to do. Ethan's gaze shifted, finally pulled away from the spiral he couldn't control, and landed on her. She wasn't dressed like the others, no designer label shouting status, no calculated elegance, just a simple navy dress that moved naturally as she walked, her posture relaxed, her steps unhurried, as if she weren't walking into a crisis, but into a conversation she already understood. Ava Johnson didn't look at Ethan, didn't look at the cameras, didn't acknowledge the weight of the room pressing in from all sides. She looked at the children, and only the children. Lucas noticed her first, his glare sharp, defensive, ready to push away another adult who thought they had a solution, another stranger who would try to fix something they didn't understand. But Ava didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She lowered herself slowly, not rushing, not forcing, until she was kneeling just a few feet away from him, eye level, her hands resting loosely in front of her, not reaching, not grabbing, just present. I'm right here, she said quietly, her voice barely above the hum of the air conditioning, and for a moment, nothing happened. The room held its breath, waiting for the next outburst, the next collapse, the next reason to confirm what everyone already believed, that no one could handle the Carter twins, that they were too much, too broken, too far gone. Lily shifted first, just a fraction, her grip loosening on the tablecloth, her eyes flickering toward Ava as if testing something invisible, something fragile. Lucas's shoulders remained tense, his jaw set, but his breathing slowed, just slightly, just enough to notice if you were paying attention, and Ava didn't speak again. She didn't fill the silence with instructions or reassurance. She let it exist. She let them choose, and Ethan felt it before he understood it, that something had changed, not dramatically, not in a way that would make headlines or fix everything in a single moment, but in a way that felt real. Like the first crack in a wall that had never moved before, his chest tightened, not with panic this time, but with something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to hope, because for the first time in months, His son wasn't escalating, his daughter wasn't retreating, and the woman kneeling in front of them wasn't trying to control them. She was simply staying, and somehow, that was enough to make the noise of the room fade. Enough to make the judgment soften. Enough to make Ethan Carter, a man who controlled everything else in his world, realize that he had just witnessed something he could not explain. And for the first time, he wasn't asking how to stop the chaos. He was asking a different question entirely. Who is she? And how did she just reach them when no one else ever could? The applause never came back the way it was before. It returned cautiously, like people were unsure if they were allowed to breathe again. Conversations resumed in soft fragments. Glasses lifted, but the energy had shifted in a way no one could fully explain. And at the center of it all, Lucas stood quieter now. Not calm, not happy, but no longer unraveling. Lily had stepped closer to him, her small hand brushing against his sleeve as if she needed to confirm he was still there. And Ava remained where she was for one more second before slowly rising, not rushing the moment, not claiming credit for it, just allowing it to settle. Ethan finally moved, one step forward, then another, the distance between him and his children suddenly feeling heavier than it should have, as if every failed attempt from the past had built an invisible wall he did not know how to cross. He stopped a few feet away, his voice measured but tight. "Lucas," he said, and the boy glanced at him, not with anger this time, but with something more complicated, something that made Ethan hesitate, because he realized he did not know what to say next. Ava noticed it, not the words but the absence of them, and without looking at Ethan, she spoke softly. "You can stand here," she said, her tone neutral, not instructing Lucas, not correcting Ethan, just placing a bridge where there had been none. Ethan stepped closer, carefully, as if the moment might break if he moved too fast. Lily shifted again, this time closer to Ava, her eyes lifting for a brief second before dropping, and Ava gave a small nod, acknowledging her without making it a big thing. The music in the background changed tracks, something softer now, almost fitting the quiet that had replaced the chaos. Across the room a few guests still watched, curiosity mixed with disbelief. One of the event coordinators whispered to another, "Who is she?" And no one had an answer, not even Ethan, not yet. The rest of the evening moved forward but never fully returned to its original rhythm. Lucas stayed close to his sister, occasionally glancing at Ava as if making sure she had not disappeared. Lily held on to a small folded napkin Ava had handed her earlier, twisting it gently between her fingers like it meant something more than paper, and Ava did not hover. She did not insert herself into every moment. She simply remained within reach, a steady presence that did not demand attention. When the final guests began to leave and the lights dimmed slightly, signaling the end of the event, Ethan found her near the edge of the ballroom, standing by one of the tall windows overlooking the city, her reflection faint against the glass, her posture relaxed as if she had not just shifted the entire tone of the night. He approached slowly, not out of hesitation, but because he needed a second to understand what he was about to say. "You handled that differently," he said finally, his voice low enough that it lines of light far below. And for a moment Ethan had no response, because she was not accusing him. She was stating something he could not easily argue against. Behind them Lucas and Lily lingered near the doorway, waiting, not restless, not demanding, just waiting, and Ethan noticed it, really noticed it, the absence of urgency, the absence of resistance, the way they were not trying to run or hide, just staying. And it unsettled him more than the chaos had, because it meant something had shifted beyond his control. "What do you want?" he asked, not as a challenge but as a genuine question. Ava tilted her head slightly, considering it. "A chance," she said, "to work with them, not on them." The distinction was small but clear, and Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the past few months pressing against the possibility of something different, something untested. "No one has lasted more than a week," he said, the words carrying more warning than he intended. Ava's expression did not change. "Then we will start with tomorrow," she replied, calm, grounded, as if time itself was not something to rush. Ethan glanced toward his children again, Lily now standing a little closer to Ava than before, Lucas watching everything with quiet intensity, and for the first time he did not feel like he was choosing between control and collapse. He felt like he was standing at the edge of something unfamiliar, something that required trust, not authority, and that was far more difficult. For him, he looked back at Ava, studying her as if trying to find proof of what she had done, some technique, some explanation he could categorize and manage. But there was none, just a woman who had walked into a moment everyone else had failed to handle and stayed long enough for it to change. Tomorrow, he repeated quietly, and Ava gave a small nod, as if that was enough, as if that was all that was needed to begin. The next morning did not begin with chaos, and that alone felt unfamiliar. The Carter estate stood quiet under a pale gray sky, the kind of stillness that usually came before something went wrong. But today it lingered longer, stretching into the hallways and settling into the polished floors that reflected the early light. Ethan stood in his home office, coffee untouched on the desk. His attention divided between the schedule on his tablet and the faint sounds drifting from down the hall, or more precisely, the lack of them, because silence in this house had never meant peace. It had meant tension building somewhere out of sight. And yet he did not hear doors slamming, no raised voices, no hurried footsteps from staff trying to contain another situation, just quiet, steady quiet. He set the tablet down slowly, listening again, trying to decide whether to trust it. Across the house, Ava moved through the kitchen with an ease that did not belong to someone on her first official day. She was not searching for control, she was learning the space, opening drawers, noting where things were kept, not rearranging anything, just observing. A small wooden music box sat on the counter beside her, worn at the edges, simple, not expensive. She turned the key once, and a soft melody filled the air, light, almost fragile, the kind of sound that did not demand attention but invited it. She did not call for Lucas or Lily. She did not announce breakfast or instructions. She simply let the sound travel. Upstairs, Lily heard it first, standing in the doorway of her room, her hair still unbrushed, her fingers wrapped around the edge of the doorframe. She listened, head tilted slightly. The melody unfamiliar but steady, not loud enough to startle, just enough to be noticed. She stepped into the hallway slowly, each step cautious, as if the moment might disappear if she moved too quickly. Lucas appeared behind her a second later, his expression guarded, already expecting something he would need to resist, but the house did not push back at him. It did not demand anything. It just played that quiet tune from somewhere below. Ava did not look up when they entered the kitchen. She was slicing fruit, movements unhurried, precise but not rigid, the music box resting beside her, still playing. Lily moved closer first, stopping a few feet away, her eyes fixed on the small object. Lucas stayed back, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, watching everything, measuring it. Ava finished what she was doing before she spoke, placing the knife down gently, then glancing toward Lily, not directly, just enough to acknowledge her presence. "It belonged to my grandmother," she said softly, her voice blending with the music instead of interrupting. Lily's fingers lifted slightly, then dropped. Unsure, Ava did not offer it. She did not push it forward. She just waited, and after a moment Lily stepped closer, her hand reaching out slowly, pausing just before touching the box as if asking permission without words. Ava gave a small nod, and Lily's fingers brushed the surface. Light, careful. Lucas shifted his weight, still watching, still unsure, but no longer preparing to leave. The kitchen remained calm, no instructions, no rules laid out, just presence, just space. Ava turned off the music after a few seconds, not abruptly, just enough to keep it from becoming overwhelming. "We can make pancakes," she said, simple, optional, not a command. Lily looked at her, then at the counter, then back at the box, as if weighing her choices. Lucas let out a quiet breath, something between skepticism and curiosity. "We do not eat pancakes on weekdays," he said, the words sharp but not aggressive, more like a test. Ava nodded once, accepting the statement without correcting it. "Then we can try something new today," she replied, calm, steady, leaving the door open instead of closing it with authority. Lucas did not respond immediately, and that hesitation mattered more than agreement would have, because it meant he was considering, not rejecting. Lily moved to the counter, her hand still resting lightly on the music box. "Can I keep it here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ava smiled softly. "It can stay as long as you need it," she said, and Lily nodded. A small, almost invisible movement, but real. Upstairs, Ethan stood in the hallway now. Watching from a distance, he had not realized he had crossed. He had expected resistance, disruption, something to confirm what he already believed. But instead, he saw his daughter standing in the kitchen without fear, his son still present without defiance, and a woman who was not managing them, not controlling them, just guiding the space around them until they chose to step into it. He leaned slightly against the wall, the coffee still untouched in his hand, and for the first time in a long time, he did not feel the need to intervene. He felt something else instead, something quieter, something uncertain but steady, as if the house itself had taken a breath it had been holding for months. And as the morning light grew brighter across the floor, reflecting off the small music box now sitting between them, Ethan realized that whatever Ava was doing, it was not temporary, it was not surface level, it was something deeper, something that did not force change but allowed it to begin, and that was something he could not control, but for the first time, he was not sure he wanted to. The change did not announce itself. It settled quietly into the corners of the house, into the spaces where tension used to live, and by mid-morning it had become something harder to ignore, not because it was loud, but because it was consistent. Lucas sat at the kitchen island, not participating, not resisting, just present, his fingers tapping lightly against the surface in a rhythm that had nothing to do with impatience and everything to do with thinking. Lily remained close to the music box, opening and closing the lid carefully as if testing whether the sound would still return. Ava moved between them without directing them, placing a bowl, setting down a glass of milk, small actions that created structure without announcing rules. And it was that difference that made the moment hold. Upstairs, the rest of the household had begun to notice. A housekeeper paused in the hallway longer than necessary, listening. Another staff member exchanged a quiet look near the staircase, confusion, replacing the usual urgency that came with mornings like this. And at the far end of the corridor, Mrs. Dalton, the head housekeeper, stood with her arms folded, her posture sharp, her eyes focused not on the children but on Ava, measuring, evaluating, questioning what she could not yet explain. Ethan remained in his office longer than he needed to, not because he was working but because he was listening. Every few seconds his attention pulled back to the absence of disruption, the absence of raised voices, the absence of calls for intervention, and the more he noticed it, the more unsettled he became, because it challenged everything he had come to accept as normal. When he finally stepped out into the hallway, the quiet followed him, not fragile, not temporary, just there. He moved toward the kitchen slowly, not wanting to interrupt something he did not fully understand. As he reached the doorway, he stopped. Just out of sight, Lucas was still at the island, but his posture had changed, his shoulders no longer rigid, his gaze shifting between Ava and the objects in front of him. Lily had moved closer to Ava, standing beside her now instead of across the room, her hand occasionally brushing against Ava's sleeve, as if grounding herself in something steady. Ava noticed everything, but reacted to almost nothing. She let moments unfold. She allowed space for choices instead of filling it with instructions. "Do you want strawberries or bananas?" she asked her tone even, offering, not expecting. Lily answered first, "Strawberries." Her voice soft but clear. Lucas did not respond, but his hand reached toward the bowl a second later, taking a slice without looking up, and that small action carried more weight than any agreement, because it was his decision, not a reaction. Ava did not acknowledge it directly. She simply continued, maintaining the rhythm, and that was when Mrs. Dalton stepped into the room, her presence immediate, structured, a contrast to the calm that had settled. "Mr. Carter has very specific expectations for morning routines," she said, her voice polite but firm, her gaze fixed on Ava, not the children. Ava turned slightly, meeting her eyes without tension. "I understand," she replied, calm, steady. Mrs. Dalton's expression did not soften. "The children are expected to be ready for their tutors by 9 sharp. Breakfast is usually served in the dining room, and there are protocols in place for consistency, each word precise, practiced, built on years of maintaining order in a household that demanded it." Ava nodded once, acknowledging the structure without rejecting it. "We will be ready," she said simply, not defensive, not dismissive, just certain. Lucas's tapping stopped, his eyes flickering between the two women. Sensing the shift, Lily's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the counter. The room held still for a second, the kind of stillness that usually preceded resistance, but Ava did not challenge Mrs. Dalton. She did not argue or explain. She returned her attention to the children. "We have time," she said softly, and the tension that had begun to build dissolved before it could take shape. Mrs. Dalton watched for another moment, her gaze lingering, searching for something to correct, something to assert control over, but finding none, she turned and left without another word, her heels echoing faintly down the hallway. Ethan exhaled quietly from the doorway, a breath he had not realized he was holding, because that moment, brief as it was, had been the test, not of structure, but of stability, and Ava had not broken it. She had absorbed it, redirected it, without force, without confrontation, and that was something he had never seen before. Lucas picked up another piece of fruit, slower this time, more deliberate. Lily glanced up at Ava, then toward the hallway where Mrs. Dalton had disappeared, then back again, and Ava gave her a small nod, not reassurance, not instruction, just acknowledgement, the kind that said nothing had changed, that she was still here, and that was enough. Ethan stepped back from the doorway, his mind no longer focused on schedules or expectations, but on something far less tangible, something that could not be measured or managed, because what he had just witnessed was not control, it was trust beginning to form, and for the first time, he understood that if he wanted to keep this fragile, growing balance, he would have to let go of the need to dictate every step, and that realization was more difficult than any problem he had ever solved, because it required something he had not practiced in a very long time: patience. The rhythm of the house began to take shape not through commands, but through repetition, small moments stacking quietly on top of each other until they formed something that felt almost like routine, and by early afternoon the light had shifted, stretching longer across the floors, warming the corners of rooms that had once felt too still to enter. Ava sat at the low table in the living room, a sketchbook open in front of her, blank pages waiting without pressure, without expectation. Lily sat across from her, legs tucked beneath her, watching the pencil move slowly across the paper, not asking what it was, just observing. Lucas remained on the couch behind them, a book open in his hands but unread, his eyes lifting every few seconds toward the table as if pulled by something he did not want to admit. Ava did not invite him. She did not call him over. She let the distance exist. She let him choose it. The pencil continued moving, soft lines forming shapes that did not immediately make sense: a house, a tree, two small figures standing close together. Lily leaned forward slightly, her fingers pressing into the edge of the table. "That is not our house," she said quietly, not criticizing, just noticing. Ava nodded. "It is not," she replied, still drawing. "It is just a place where people feel safe." Lily's eyes lingered on the paper, her expression shifting, not fully understanding but recognizing something in the idea. Lucas closed his book without realizing it, the sound soft but enough to mark a decision. He stood, slowly, casually, as if it did not matter, and walked toward the table, stopping just behind Lily, looking down at the page without speaking. Ava continued drawing as if nothing had changed, as if he had always been there. And that was the difference. She did not make his presence an event, she made it normal. "You can draw too," she said after a moment. Placing a second pencil on the table without looking up, Lucas hesitated, his hand hovering just above it, then pulling back, then hovering again, the internal negotiation visible in the smallest movements. Lily glanced up at him, then back at the page, then at the pencil, and without saying anything she slid it slightly closer to him. A quiet gesture, but deliberate. Lucas exhaled softly, almost a sigh, and this time when his hand moved, it did not stop. His fingers closed around the pencil, and he sat down, not fully relaxed, not fully engaged, but there, and that was enough. Ava did not guide him, did not tell him what to draw. She simply continued her own lines, allowing his to form beside hers. At first they were sharp, controlled, shapes pressed harder into the page than necessary, but gradually they softened, the pressure easing, the lines becoming less rigid, more fluid. Time passed without announcement, the kind of time that was measured not in minutes but in moments that held, and upstairs Ethan moved through his office again, attempting to focus on work that no longer held his attention the way it used to, his mind returning again and again to the quiet downstairs, to the absence of disruption that had now lasted longer than any calm he had seen in months. He stood, walked to the window, then back again, the restlessness unfamiliar, until finally he stepped into the hallway once more, drawn by something he could not ignore. When he reached the living room, he did not enter. He remained just beyond the doorway, watching. Lucas was sitting at the table, pencil in hand, Lily beside him, Ava across from them, and the scene was so ordinary that it felt extraordinary. No raised voices, no tension thick in the air, just three people sharing space, creating something together without forcing it. He watched Lucas's hand move, slower now, more deliberate, drawing something that resembled the outline of a person, then another, then stopping, his brow furrowing, slightly as if he was unsure how to continue. Ava did not step in. She did not correct. She let him sit in that uncertainty. And after a moment, Lily leaned closer, her finger pointing lightly at the page. "You forgot the hands," she said softly, not criticizing, just helping. Lucas glanced at her, then back at the drawing, and added them. Small, simple, but complete. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, something he had not felt in a long time. Not relief exactly, not yet, but recognition. Recognition that this was not luck, not coincidence. This was something being built, slowly, intentionally, without force, and it unsettled him because it meant the solution he had been searching for was not something he could buy or demand. It was something he had to allow. The light in the room softened as the afternoon moved forward, the sketchbook filling with small drawings, none of them perfect, none of them meant to be, but each one marking a step, a choice, a moment of connection that had not existed before. Ava closed the sketchbook gently after a while, not ending the activity but preserving it. "We can continue tomorrow," she said, her tone easy, not final. Lucas looked at the closed pages, then at her, then away, but he did not protest. Lily reached out and placed her hand on top of the cover, as if holding it in place, as if making sure it would still be there later, and Ava gave a small nod, acknowledging the unspoken agreement. From the doorway, Ethan stepped back, quietly, the image staying with him, not just what he saw, but what it meant, because for the first time he understood that healing was not something that arrived all at once. It was something that unfolded, quietly, in moments like this, and if he interrupted it, if he tried to control it, he might lose it before it had the chance to fully take root, and that realization stayed with him long after he left the room, echoing in the silence that no longer felt empty, but full. The house did not rush into the next phase of the day. It eased into it, the late afternoon light stretching across the living room floor, touching the edges of the closed sketchbook as if marking it as something important, something to return to. Lucas remained seated a little longer than necessary, his hand resting near where the pencil had been, not picking it up again, not moving away either, caught in the space between habit and change. Lily sat beside him, quieter now, her earlier curiosity settling into something more steady, something that did not need constant reassurance. Ava stood and moved toward the window, not leaving them but giving them distance. Her presence still felt even when she was not directly beside them. And that was the difference. She did not need to stay close to be felt. Upstairs, Ethan paused outside his office again, his phone in his hand, a call half finished. His attention divided between the conversation and the quiet below that continued. "Without interruption, reschedule it," he said into the phone, his tone distracted. "Tomorrow morning." He ended the call and stood there for a moment longer than usual, listening, the absence of tension now becoming something he relied on, something he measured his day against. When he finally walked back toward the stairs, the sound of a door opening broke the rhythm, not loudly, but enough to shift the air. Lucas stood in the hallway now, his posture uncertain, his gaze moving toward the front entrance, the space beyond it larger, more open, more unpredictable than the controlled calm inside. Lily followed a step behind, her hand brushing lightly against the wall, as if anchoring herself. Ava noticed them from across the room, but did not call out. She watched, waiting, allowing the moment to unfold without directing it. Lucas reached for the handle, hesitated, then pulled the door open. The outside air moved in immediately, cooler, carrying the distant sounds of the city, cars passing, voices far away, life continuing beyond the walls that had held so much of their silence. He stepped out onto the front path, not running, not escaping, just stepping into something unfamiliar. Lily remained at the threshold, watching him, then looking back at Ava, her expression questioning without words. Ava walked toward her slowly, not to stop her, not to guide her, just to be there. "You can stay, or you can go," she said softly, her voice calm, offering choice instead of direction. Lily looked outside again, then back at Ava, then took a small step forward, crossing the threshold, the two of them now standing just outside the door. Lucas had moved a few feet ahead, his shoulders tense but not defensive, his eyes scanning the space as if trying to understand it again. The world beyond the house had not changed, but his place in it had, and that difference made every step feel uncertain. Ava stayed near the doorway, not following immediately, not closing the distance, giving him space to decide what this moment meant. Ethan reached the bottom of the stairs just in time to see it, his children outside, not in chaos, not being pulled back by staff, just there, standing in the open air, and Ava behind them, not chasing, not controlling, just present. His instinct rose immediately, to call them back, to contain the situation before it could shift, but he stopped, his voice catching before it could form, because this did not feel like something to interrupt. It felt like something fragile that required patience. Lucas took another step forward, then another, the gravel beneath his shoes shifting slightly, the sound grounding him in the moment. He turned back briefly, not fully, just enough to check, and his eyes met Ava's. And for a second nothing moved. No one spoke. And then he looked forward again, continuing. Lily stayed closer, her steps smaller, her hand brushing against Ava's sleeve once before she let it fall, choosing to move on her own, the distance between them and the house growing slowly, not as an act of defiance, but as an act of exploration. Ava stepped forward then, just one step, maintaining that balance, not too close, not too far. Ethan remained in the doorway, his hand resting lightly against the frame, watching, his mind racing through every possible outcome, every risk, every reason to intervene, but none of them matched what he was seeing, because there was no escalation, no loss of control, just movement, quiet, deliberate movement, and that was something he had not prepared for. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the path, the air cooling slightly, and Lucas stopped, turning fully this time, looking back at the house, then at Ava, then at Lily, as if trying to place himself within all of it. And for the first time there was no resistance in his posture, no expectation of conflict, just uncertainty, and Ava met it with the same calm she had carried from the beginning, not answering the unspoken question, not filling the silence, just holding the space until he found his own answer. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded, not to anyone in particular, just to the moment itself, as if acknowledging that something had changed, something he did not fully understand yet, but something he was willing to step into. And behind them Ethan exhaled, the tension leaving his body in a way that felt unfamiliar, because it was not relief from control. It was relief from the need to control, and that difference stayed with him as he watched them take one more step forward into a world that no longer felt like something to escape from, but something they might finally be ready to face. The evening settled slowly, not with the sharp edge of endings, but with a quiet continuation of everything that had begun to shift, the air outside cooling as the sky softened into muted shades of orange and blue. Lucas stood near the edge of the path, his gaze fixed on something in the distance that only he seemed to understand, while Lily remained a few steps behind, her presence steady, her attention moving between her brother and Ava, as if she were learning how to balance both. Ava stayed where she was, not closing the distance, not calling them back, allowing the moment to belong to them. The kind of patience that did not rush toward resolution but trusted the process itself. From the doorway Ethan watched, his hand no longer gripping the frame, but resting lightly against it. The tension that had once defined every movement now replaced with something quieter, something that felt unfamiliar and yet necessary. Lucas shifted his weight, then took a slow breath, his shoulders rising and falling in a rhythm that no longer matched urgency but awareness. He looked down at the ground, then back up again, as if orienting himself in a space that had once felt overwhelming but now felt different, not safe yet, but possible. Lily took another small step forward, her shoes brushing softly against the gravel, the sound barely audible but grounding, and for a moment the three of them existed in that shared silence, not empty, but full of something unspoken, something that did not need to be named to be understood. Ava finally stepped closer, not enough to interrupt, just enough to be present if needed. "We can go back inside whenever you are ready," she said, her voice calm, offering an exit without pressure. Lucas did not respond immediately, his gaze still forward, still searching, and then slowly, almost reluctantly, he nodded once, not because he was told to, but because he had decided, and that distinction mattered. Lily noticed it too, her shoulders relaxing just slightly, her breath evening out. Ava turned without waiting, walking back toward the house with the quiet confidence that they would follow, and they did, not instantly, not in perfect sync, but in their own time, step by step. Lucas first, then Lily, their movements unforced, their pace steady. As they crossed back into the house, the shift was subtle but real. The inside no longer felt like a place to retreat from the outside, but a place that connected to it, a space that held both calm and possibility. Ethan stepped back to give them room, his eyes following every movement, every small choice. And when Lucas passed him, he did not flinch, did not pull away. He simply walked by, his focus forward, his posture open in a way that had not existed before. Lily paused briefly near Ethan, her gaze lifting for a second, then lowering again. But she did not move away quickly. She did not retreat, and that small hesitation carried more meaning than words ever could. Ava moved through the space with the same steady rhythm she had carried all day, guiding without directing, shaping without forcing. "We can wash our hands, and then have dinner," she said, her tone simple, not a command, just the next step. Lucas glanced toward the hallway, then back at her, then turned and walked in that direction without protest. Lily followed, her steps lighter now, and Ethan remained where he was for a moment longer. The quiet around him no longer something he needed to manage, but something he needed to understand. The house felt different, not because anything physical had changed, but because the energy within it had shifted, the walls no longer holding tension, but something softer, something that allowed movement, allowed choice. He walked slowly toward the kitchen, stopping again just before entering. The scene inside simple, almost ordinary, the kind of scene he had once taken for granted. The sound of water running, the clink of dishes, the low hum of voices that did not rise or break. Ava stood near the sink, guiding without instruction, Lucas beside her, his movements careful but not resistant, Lily drying her hands with a small towel, glancing occasionally toward the music box that still sat on the counter, untouched but present, a quiet reminder of where the day had begun. Ethan leaned slightly against the doorway, not hiding, not intruding, just observing. And for the first time he allowed himself to feel something beyond control, beyond strategy. Something that felt like trust beginning to form. Not fully, not completely, but enough to recognize, enough to hold on to. And as the evening continued to unfold in that same steady rhythm, he realized that what Ava had brought into this house was not just calm. It was a different way of being, a way that did not fight against the chaos but understood it, and in doing so, transformed it. And that was something no one else had been able to do, not because they lacked skill, but because they had never approached it with the same quiet certainty that change did not need to be forced, it needed to be allowed. The night carried a different kind of quiet, not the heavy silence that once filled the house, but something lighter, something that felt like it could hold without breaking. The dining room was softly lit, the long table no longer a place of distance, but a space that was slowly becoming shared. Ava set the plates down one by one, not assigning seats, not directing where anyone should go, just preparing the space and letting it exist. Lucas entered first, his steps slower than usual, his eyes scanning the table as if it were unfamiliar territory. Lily followed, her gaze moving immediately to the music box that Ava had brought with her and placed near the center, not as decoration, but as something steady, something known. Ethan arrived last, his presence quieter than it had ever been in this room, not leading, not commanding, just joining, and that alone shifted something. They sat, not in perfect order, not in strict positions, but where it felt right. Ava across from the children, Ethan at the end of the table, not distant, but observing. The first few moments passed without conversation, not uncomfortable, just new, forks lifting, glasses shifting, small sounds that filled the space naturally. Lily glanced up once. Then again, her eyes moving between Ava and Ethan, as if waiting for something to go wrong, something to confirm what she had come to expect. But it did not come. Ava reached for the music box, turning the key just once, the melody soft, barely rising above the quiet clink of dishes. Lucas paused, his fork hovering midair, his attention pulled toward the sound, not resisting it, not pushing it away, just noticing. Ethan watched this, every detail, the way his son did not tense, the way his daughter did not retreat, the way the room held steady. "We do not usually play music during dinner," he said after a moment, his voice neutral, not correcting, just stating what had always been. Ava looked up briefly, meeting his gaze without challenge. "We can try something new today," she replied, echoing the same calm she had carried from the morning, and Ethan did not respond, not because he disagreed, but because he realized that the structure he had relied on was not what had been missing. It was what had been incomplete. Lucas set his fork down slowly, his eyes still on the music box. "It is not loud," he said, almost to himself, the words soft, thoughtful, and Ava nodded. "It does not need to be," she said, and Lily's shoulders relaxed slightly, her breathing evening out in a way that was almost imperceptible, but real. The meal continued, small moments threading together. Lily asking for more water without hesitation, Lucas finishing his food without being reminded, Ava responding without praise, without turning it into something bigger than it was, just allowing it to be normal, and Ethan remained quiet, not because he had nothing to say, but because he was learning that not every moment required his voice, that sometimes presence was enough, and that realization settled deeper than anything else had that day. Halfway through the meal, Lily reached toward the music box, her fingers brushing against it lightly. "Can it stay here tonight?" she asked, her voice steady but hopeful. Ava looked at her, then at Ethan, not for permission, but for inclusion, and Ethan paused. The question simple, the answer not as immediate as it should have been, because it required him to let go of a rule he had never questioned. "Yes," he said finally, his voice softer than usual, and Lily nodded, her hand resting on the box for a second. Longer before returning to her plate, Lucas glanced at Ethan briefly, then back down, not reacting outwardly, but something in his posture shifted, something that suggested he had noticed, that he had registered the change, and that it mattered. The rest of the evening unfolded without disruption. The conversation minimal but present, the space no longer defined by what was missing, but by what was quietly growing. After dinner, Ava cleared the table with the same unhurried rhythm, Lucas carrying his plate to the counter without being asked, Lily following with hers, their movements small but intentional. Ethan watched from his seat for a moment before standing, joining them, not out of obligation, but because it felt like the natural next step. And as the kitchen filled with the soft sounds of water and dishes, the music box playing its gentle melody in the background, he realized that the house no longer felt like something he needed to fix. It felt like something that was already beginning to heal. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that this change was not temporary, not fragile in the way he had feared, but steady, growing in ways that did not demand attention, but earned it. And as he glanced toward Ava, standing calmly beside his children, guiding without controlling, present without overwhelming, he understood that what she had brought into their lives was not just care. It was a different kind of strength, one that did not force change, but created the space for it to happen. And that was something he had never known how to give, until now. The night did not end with noise or resistance. It softened into something that lingered, something that stayed even after the lights dimmed and the house settled into its usual stillness. But this time the stillness was different. It did not feel like something waiting to break. It felt like something holding. And in the quiet of the hallway outside their rooms, the smallest moment of the day began to unfold. Lily stood in her doorway, the music box held carefully in both hands, her fingers wrapped around it, as if it carried more than sound, as if it carried safety itself. Lucas stood a few steps away, leaning lightly against the wall, His arms no longer crossed in defense but resting at his sides, his posture open in a way that had not existed before. Ava stood between them but not in front of them, not leading, just present, allowing the space to remain theirs. "We can listen once more," she said softly, her voice matching the quiet of the house. Lily nodded immediately, stepping forward into her room, placing the music box gently on her bedside table, turning the key with care. The melody filled the space again, softer now, almost like a whisper. Lucas hesitated in the doorway, his eyes shifting between his sister and the hallway behind him, as if deciding whether this was something he was allowed to enter. Ava did not call him in. She did not offer reassurance. She simply stood where she was, and after a moment Lucas stepped forward, slow, deliberate. Choosing it on his own, he moved to the edge of the room, stopping just inside, not fully committing but not retreating either. Lily climbed onto her bed, sitting near the music box, her gaze fixed on it, her breathing steady. Ava sat in the chair, near the window, not speaking, not filling the silence, just holding it. And for a moment the three of them shared something that did not need explanation, something that existed beyond routine or instruction, something that felt like peace beginning to take shape. Down the hallway Ethan stood outside, not close enough to intrude, but near enough to hear the faint melody drifting through the door, his hand resting lightly against the wall, his eyes fixed on the soft glow of light beneath the doorframe. And he did not move, because this was not something he wanted to interrupt, it was something he needed to understand. Inside the room Lucas shifted his weight, then slowly sat down on the edge of the rug, not looking at anyone, just listening, his breathing matching the rhythm of the music without him realizing it. Lily lay back against her pillows, her eyes still open but softer now, no longer searching, no longer bracing, just present. Ava watched them both, not with expectation, but with quiet attention, allowing the moment to unfold without guiding it toward an outcome. And that was when Lucas spoke, his voice low, almost uncertain. "It stops too fast," he said, not complaining, just noticing. Ava nodded slightly. "Then we can play it again tomorrow," she replied, her tone steady, offering continuity instead of solution. Lucas did not respond, but he did not withdraw either, and that was enough. The melody slowed, the final notes fading into the quiet, and for a brief second the room held still, as if waiting to see what would come next. Lily's eyes closed first, not forced, not coaxed, just natural, her hand resting lightly beside the music box, her breathing even. Lucas remained where he was, his gaze shifting toward his sister, then toward Ava, then down to his hands, as if trying to understand something he could not yet name. Ava stood slowly, not rushing, moving toward the door. "I will be right outside," she said, not leaving completely, not staying inside, just placing herself in that space where she could be felt without being seen. Lucas watched her go, his eyes following her movement, and for the first time he did not look like he was preparing for someone to disappear. He looked like he believed she would still be there, and that belief, small as it was, changed everything. Outside the room, Ethan stepped back as Ava opened the door, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. No words exchanged, none needed, because what had happened inside that room was something neither of them wanted to break by naming it too soon. Ava moved to the chair in the hallway, sitting just outside the door, her presence steady, quiet, constant. And Ethan remained where he was for a moment longer before turning away, walking slowly down the hall, the sound of the music still echoing faintly in his mind. Not just the melody, but what it had created, a moment where his children had not been managed, not been corrected, but simply been allowed to be. And in that space, something had shifted, something real, something lasting. And as he reached the end of the hallway and paused, looking back once more toward the closed door, he realized that for the first time in a long time, the night did not feel like something to endure, it felt like something to trust, and that was a change he had not believed possible until now. The morning arrived quietly, almost as if the house itself did not want to disturb what had been built the night before. Sunlight filtered softly through the tall windows, casting gentle patterns across the hallway floor, and for a moment everything held, undisturbed, steady. Ava remained seated just outside the bedroom door, exactly where she had promised she would be, her posture relaxed. Her eyes closed for a brief second before opening again as the faint sound of movement came from inside. She did not rush. She did not stand immediately. She simply listened, allowing the moment to unfold on its own. Inside the room, Lily stirred first, her hand brushing lightly against the music box as if confirming it was still there, her eyes opening slowly, adjusting to the morning light. And for a brief second there was no confusion, no panic, just quiet awareness. Lucas was already awake, sitting on the floor where he had remained, his back resting against the side of the bed, his gaze unfocused but calm, as if he had been awake for some time, simply existing in the stillness, the kind of stillness that had once been uncomfortable but now felt different, more stable. Ava knocked gently on the doorframe, not entering, just making her presence known. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice steady, consistent, and Lily turned her head toward the sound, a small smile forming without hesitation, not wide, not exaggerated, just real. "You stayed," she said, her voice still quiet. "From sleep," and Ava nodded once. "I said I would," she replied, and Lucas looked up then, his eyes meeting hers, not searching this time, not questioning, just acknowledging, and that alone carried more meaning than anything he could have said. Ava stepped inside slowly, not changing the rhythm of the room, just becoming part of it again. "We can start the day whenever you are ready," she added, leaving the timing in their hands. Lily sat up, her movements unhurried, her fingers still resting lightly on the music box, as if it had become something she trusted, something she did not need to question anymore. Lucas stood after a moment, stretching slightly, his posture looser, less guarded. The tension that had once lived in every movement now softened into something more natural. They moved through the morning without resistance, brushing teeth, changing clothes, each step guided by presence rather than instruction, Ava nearby, but never pushing. And when they reached the kitchen, the familiar calm returned. The same soft light, the same steady rhythm, the music box placed gently on the counter once again, not as a necessity, but as a choice. Ethan stood already inside, his coffee in hand, watching as they entered, his expression unreadable for a second before something shifted, something subtle but real, because this was not the same morning he had known before. Lucas walked past him without hesitation, not avoiding him, just moving naturally. Lily paused briefly, her eyes lifting toward Ethan, then lowering again, but she did not pull away, she did not retreat, and Ethan noticed. He noticed everything, the absence of tension, the presence of something new, something fragile but growing. Ava moved toward the counter, beginning breakfast without announcement, the routine forming itself quietly. "We have time," she said again, the same words, the same tone, and this time Ethan understood them differently, not as a delay, but as an invitation to slow down. Lucas reached for a plate, placing it on the counter, a simple action, but one that had never come without prompting before. Lily stood beside Ava, watching, her movements small but intentional, and Ethan set his coffee down, stepping forward without being asked, without needing a reason. He reached for another plate, placing it beside the others, the action almost unfamiliar, but right, and Ava glanced at him briefly, a small nod, not praise, not acknowledgement, just recognition, and that was enough. The morning continued, steady, quiet, full in a way that did not demand attention, and as the sunlight grew brighter, filling the room with warmth, Ethan realized that this was no longer just a moment. It was becoming something more, something that could last, something that could change everything if he allowed it to, and for the first time, he was ready to do exactly that. The day did not hold its calm without question. It stretched forward into new spaces, into moments that had not yet been tested, and by mid-morning, the house began to feel the weight of something different, not chaos, but attention, the kind that comes when change becomes visible to more than just those inside it. In the main sitting room, Mrs. Dalton stood near the doorway once again, her posture as precise as ever, but her expression tighter now, less certain, her eyes following Lucas and Lily as they moved through the space without resistance. Without the patterns she had spent months trying to manage, she had seen consistency before. Routines enforced, behavior corrected, but this was not that. This was something she could not categorize, and that made it harder to accept. Ava sat nearby with the sketchbook open once again, not initiating the moment, just allowing it to return naturally. Lucas approached first this time, not hesitating as long, his hand reaching for the pencil without the same internal struggle. Lily followed, sitting beside him, her presence quieter but steady, and Ava simply turned the page, giving them space to begin. "You can draw anything," she said softly, her voice the same as always, even, unpressured, and Lucas began, the lines more fluid now, less controlled, forming shapes that resembled the house, the path, the space outside they had stepped into the day before. Lily added beside him, smaller figures, softer lines, and for a while the room held that same quiet rhythm, until Mrs. Dalton stepped forward, her voice cutting through gently but firmly. "Mr. Carter has a meeting scheduled shortly, and the children have tutors arriving in 15 minutes, she said, her tone measured, professional, but carrying an edge that had not been there before. Ava looked up briefly, her gaze calm, acknowledging the statement without reacting to its weight. "We will be ready," she replied. The same words, the same tone, but this time Mrs. Dalton did not step back immediately, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Consistency is important," she added, her voice lowering just enough to signal something more, something beneath the surface. "Discipline creates stability." Lucas's pencil paused, his hand stilling on the page. Lily's fingers tightened slightly around her own. The room shifted, not dramatically, but enough to be felt. Ava noticed it immediately, not in their actions, but in the space between them, and she did not respond to Mrs. Dalton's words. She responded to the shift. "You can finish your drawing," she said softly, her attention returning to the children, not dismissing the structure, but prioritizing the moment. Lucas's hand moved again, slower at first, then steadier. Lily followed, her breathing easing back into rhythm, and Mrs. Dalton stood there for a second longer, her expression tightening further, because what she had said had not taken hold, had not redirected the moment the way it used to, and that loss of control unsettled her. She turned without another word, her steps sharper as she left the room, the sound of her heels echoing faintly down the hall. Upstairs, Ethan stood near the top of the staircase, having heard enough to understand the tension without needing to see it directly, his hand resting on the railing, his gaze focused downward, not on the conflict itself, but on what it represented, because this was the next stage, not chaos, but resistance from the system that had once defined the house. And he understood that this moment mattered just as much as any other, because it would determine whether the change they had begun could hold under pressure. He remained where he was, not stepping in, not asserting authority, choosing instead to trust what he had seen Ava do time and time again. And that choice did not come easily, but it came. Back in the sitting room, the tension eased slowly, not all at once, but enough for the moment to continue. Ava closed the sketchbook after a while, not abruptly, just signaling the transition. "We can continue later," she said, her voice steady, and Lucas nodded, not resisting, not questioning. Lily stood, her movements calm, and they moved toward the next part of the day without disruption, without the sharp edges that had once defined every transition. Ethan watched them from above, his chest tightening slightly, not with anxiety, but with something deeper, something that felt like recognition that what Ava had built was not fragile, it was resilient, able to hold even when challenged. And as he turned away from the railing, moving back toward his office, he realized that the real change was not just in his children. It was in the way the house itself responded to tension, no longer escalating, no longer breaking, but absorbing, adapting, and continuing forward. And that was something he had never believed possible until now. The afternoon did not fracture under pressure. It expanded, holding everything that had come before it and stretching just enough to reveal what still needed to be faced. The tutors arrived precisely on time, their footsteps measured, their expectations clear, carrying with them the structure that had once defined every hour of the children's day. But as they entered the study room, something felt different, not in the room itself, but in the energy within it. Lucas sat at the desk, not rigid, not resistant, just present, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the book in front of him, Lily beside him, her posture relaxed, her gaze attentive but not tense. Ava stood near the window, not directing the lesson, not intervening, just observing, allowing the process to unfold without interruption. The tutor began as expected, her voice steady, her instructions clear, guiding them through reading and numbers. And for the first time there was no immediate pushback, no refusal, no attempt to escape the moment. Lucas followed along, not perfectly, not without pauses, but without resistance. Lily responded when asked, her voice soft but certain, and the lesson moved forward in a way that felt almost ordinary. But beneath that surface something else existed, something quieter, something that could not be measured by correct answers or completed pages. It was the absence of fear, the absence of pressure that had once turned every task into a battle. Ava noticed it in the smallest details. The way Lucas did not grip the pencil too tightly, the way Lily did not glance constantly toward the door, waiting for an exit. And she did not step in. She did not redirect. She allowed the moment to belong to them. Across the hallway, Mrs. Dalton stood once again, her presence more distant now, but her attention no less focused. She watched through the open door, her expression unreadable, the structure she had spent years maintaining now functioning in a way she had not orchestrated. And that unsettled her in ways she could not easily explain. Upstairs, Ethan remained in his office, but his door was open, his work secondary to the quiet consistency that continued to echo through the house. He listened, not for disruption, but for continuity, for proof that what had begun was not temporary, and each passing minute without interruption confirmed something he had not allowed himself to believe before, that this change was real, that it could hold even in the spaces where control had once been absolute. The lesson ended without incident, the tutor gathering her materials with a slight pause, her eyes moving briefly toward Ava, then toward the children, as if trying to reconcile what she had expected with what she had witnessed. "They did very well today," she said, her voice carrying a hint of surprise, not exaggerated, just honest. Ava nodded once, not turning it into praise, not shifting the moment into something larger, just accepting it. Lucas closed his book slowly, his movements deliberate, his gaze lifting toward Ava for a brief second before lowering again, not seeking approval, just acknowledging presence. Lily stood, her hand brushing lightly against the edge of the desk, her posture steady, and as they moved out of the study room, the transition held, no sharp edges, no sudden shifts, just continuation. Ava guided them toward the living room, the sketchbook waiting where it had been left earlier, the pages still open to their unfinished drawings, and without instruction they returned to it. Lucas picking up the pencil again, Lily sitting beside him, the rhythm resuming as if it had never been interrupted. Upstairs, Ethan stepped out into the hallway once more, drawn by the same quiet that had become something he trusted, something he followed. And when he reached the doorway he saw it again, the same scene, but deeper now, more grounded. Not just a moment of calm, but a pattern forming, a way of being that repeated itself without force. And that was when something inside him shifted completely. Not a small realization, not a cautious hope, but a clear understanding that this was not something he could replicate through instruction or expectation. It was something that required trust, something that required him to step back not just physically, but emotionally, to allow his children to grow into this new space without the weight of his control pressing down on them. He leaned lightly against the doorway, watching as Lucas added to his drawing, the lines more confident now, forming not just shapes but connections, figures standing closer together, details that had not existed before. Lily pointing softly, adding her own touches, their movements aligned without being directed, and Ava beside them, steady, present, not leading, but supporting. And in that moment Ethan realized that what had begun as a chance, as something uncertain, had become something undeniable, something that could not be dismissed or replaced. And as he stood there, the light of the afternoon settling around them, he understood that the true change was not just in their behavior, but in their sense of safety, their willingness to exist without fear. And that was something he had not been able to give them before, but something he was finally learning how to protect. The evening did not arrive as an ending. It arrived as a continuation, a quiet extension of everything that had been built throughout the day, the golden light of late afternoon slowly fading into softer tones, settling into the corners of the house, as if it had learned how to stay. The living room remained calm, the sketchbook now filled with more than just lines and shapes. It held something deeper, something that had grown without anyone forcing it. Lucas sat at the table, his posture steady, his hand moving with a confidence that had not been there before. Lily beside him, her presence light but certain, her small additions to the page blending naturally with his, and Ava remained near them, not guiding, not correcting, just present, her quiet consistency now something they no longer questioned. Across the room, Ethan stood once again at the edge of the doorway, but this time he did not feel like an observer. He felt like part of something he was still learning to understand. He stepped inside slowly, not interrupting, not shifting the rhythm, just joining. And for the first time Lucas looked up and did not look away, his eyes meeting Ethan's for a brief second, not guarded, not distant, just aware, and that moment, small as it was, carried more meaning than anything that had come before. Lily followed his gaze, her expression softening as she looked between them, as if recognizing something she had been waiting for. Ava noticed it too, not in their words, but in the space between them, the way it no longer held tension, the way it allowed connection to exist without pressure, and she did not step in. She did not shape the moment. She allowed it to belong to them. Ethan moved closer, stopping just beside the table, his voice quieter than it had ever been. "What are you drawing?" he asked, not as a question that demanded an answer, but as an invitation. Lucas glanced down at the page, then back up, his hand pausing midair, and for a moment it seemed as if he might retreat, as if the habit of distance might return, but it did not. "It is us," he said finally, the words simple, but steady, and Ethan looked at the drawing, really looked at it, the house, the path, the small figures standing together, closer than they had ever been before, and his chest tightened, not with pressure, but with something that felt like recognition. Lily leaned slightly toward the page, her finger tracing one of the figures. "That is you," she said softly, looking up at Ethan, and he nodded, unable to find words that matched what he was feeling. Ava remained where she was, her presence steady, but her role now different, no longer the bridge, but the support that allowed the bridge to hold on its own. The room stayed quiet, but it was not empty. It was full of something that had taken time to build, something that could not be rushed or forced, something that now existed on its own. And as the light continued to fade, Ethan pulled a chair closer, sitting down beside them, not at a distance, not apart, but with them, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, not reaching, not taking, just there, and Lucas did not pull away. Lily did not hesitate. The space held, steady, real. Ava watched for a moment longer before stepping back slightly, giving them room without leaving entirely, her presence still there, but no longer needed. In the same way, and Ethan understood, not through explanation, but through the feeling of it, that what Ava had given them was not just calm, not just structure, but something far more important. She had given them a way back to each other, a way to exist in the same space without fear, without resistance. And that was something he had not known how to create on his own. He looked at her then, meeting her gaze with something deeper than gratitude, something that carried understanding, and Ava gave a small nod, not acknowledging success, but recognizing the moment for what it was, a beginning, not an ending, because healing was not something that finished, it was something that continued, something that grew with every choice, every moment, every quiet decision to stay. And as the house settled into the evening once more, the music box resting quietly on the table, the sketchbook open between them, the three figures now sitting closer than ever before, Ethan realized that this was not something temporary. It was something real, something lasting, something that would continue long after this moment passed, because for the first time, his children were not just calm, they were safe. And for the first time, he understood that safety did not come from control. It came from presence, from trust, from the quiet strength of someone who chose to stay, and that was something he would never take for granted again.